Hey guys, so I wrote this script before debating Borscht. I even put a big section in it about how I wasn't going to upload anything else until I finally got around to debating Borscht. However, then I debated Borscht. So first thing I want to say is that given that I wrote this the very same day that I debated Borscht, you might see, I feel like I've said Borscht way too much in this video already, so you might see a few echoes of the same ideas because this was what I had on my mind at the time. Now, I'm not going to really think about the Borscht debate too much for a week or so, and then I'll return back to it and really dissect how gassed he is off his own nonsense. There's only one thing I do want to address. One gender-critical commenter on the debate said that they thought I lost the debate because Borscht kept trying to turn the issue into a moral issue about trans suicide, while I was more interested in the best theory to explain gender depression. This person commented saying they felt that I should have pivoted and started engaging with the moral argument, because gender-critical feminism can win that too. Now, this is sort of subjective, and it seems like most other people, including some Borscht fans, felt I won the debate, but obviously others might have been disappointed, including some of my fans. The only issue I want to address right now, then, is that this person insinuated that I was perhaps not really interested in gender-critical feminism for the sake of standing against the wrongs being done to women, and am really only interested in winning debates by having the big boy smart brain. I think it's appropriate for my subscribers to be suspicious of me and my intentions. Male progressives on YouTube have a really shitty track record, so while I know that my intentions are good, I don't blame anybody for being hypervigilant. However, suffice it to say that I absolutely do care about the moral wrongs being done to women. It's just in that debate I wanted to keep the issue focused on showing that queer theory is just plain wrong. More generally, I do tend to avoid having debates in moral terms. That's just my style, and it would actually be disingenuous of me to change it. I also think it's appropriate for me, as a male ally, to put my main focus on demonstrating the truth of gender-critical theory, especially to other men who might operate in a similar way to me. I think that I can objectively assess the truth of queer theory, but I cannot, as a man, really know the true impact of queer theory on women's rights issues. I think that's a better thing for women themselves to talk about. This is not me promising to never talk about specific women's rights issues regarding queer theory, but that's never going to be the main focus of this channel. What I will concede, though, is that I should do more in general to elevate women's voices above my own, and particularly women who do talk regularly about the experience of women in dealing with trans activism. Exactly how I'm going to do this is something I still need to think about, but certainly if people drop recommendations of different YouTube channels for people to subscribe to below, then I will include them in a pinned comment. However, I'm not one for false modesty or anything like that, so let me be clear on one thing. I do think I am one of the best, if not the single best, YouTuber. That sounded a bit too, performative, as if I didn't really believe it, but I do. When it comes to making the intellectual case against queer theory, I am really well read on the subject. I think I have a naturally quite logical brain that's good at finding faults in faulty ideas. I think I demonstrated that against Borscht, where I held firm to my intellectual critique, and he could only retreat to moral posturing. And therefore, I hope that people who enjoy my content can appreciate the value of that, and understand if I'm not as committed to making more activism-style videos that address particular issues. This gender-critical community is an awesome one. Let's support each other, let's make it bigger, and let's get a good variety of different content creators to fill different niches. Thank you, and enjoy the video. I want to talk about this article by Laurie. But the thing is, I could spend a long time just talking about this first page right here. It's a web page, actually, so it's all just one page. The title, Turf Wars, Why Transphobia Has No Place in Feminism. And this image with a sign that declares, Feminism is intersectional. No turfs, no swerfs. No Irish, no blacks, no dogs. And then right in the centre, without a hint of irony, what happened to Sisterhood? Take a minute. Just take a minute to really think about that. Obviously, transphobia here is referring to gender-critical feminists. So gender-critical feminists have no place in feminism. In fact, not even feminists who are critical of the porn industry and other forms of sex work have a place in feminism. If you think that, hey, maybe women's bodies being directly available as something to be purchased is something that can at least be criticised from a feminist perspective, so long, you're barred, get out of here. And here we have our question. What happened to Sisterhood? So you might think that sisterhood would mean that if a woman criticises sex work, you come together and have a discussion about it. Rejection and acceptance of sex work can both be included under the wider sisterhood of feminist unity. Perhaps sisterhood would mean that when one group of feminists believe that the most intuitive, useful, and politically expedient understanding of gender is one where female biology plays a significant part in defining women, perhaps when this is the case, you would listen to their arguments, and even if you disagree with them, you could say, well, I disagree, but I understand that you have your opinion, and we should still work together on the areas where we do agree. Heck, I mean, more abstractly, you'd think that sisterhood would mean that even radically conservative, anti-feminist women should be stood by in the event that they are attacked by misogynists. That whether a woman is working for Fox News, or the Daily Mail, or National Action, insofar as she is discriminated against based on her gender, feminists should stand by her in solidarity. That's what I think would be a reasonable definition of sisterhood. And of course, maybe you'll say that no, women who go too far to the right forfeit their right to feminist solidarity because they're so blatantly rejecting the progressive message that is conducive to gender equality. However, a disagreement over sex work or the definition of gender, you'd think is surely not the type of thing that's so inexcusable as to justify somebody being excluded from feminism. If somebody can be a card-carrying bona fide progressive on every issue, but think that actually understanding gender as determined entirely and exclusively by self-identity doesn't really make sense, does it make sense based on that alone to exclude them from feminism? According to the title of this article and the image presented, yes. And again, I just want to stress that I know people will say, but the article says transphobia has no place in feminism. So are you admitting that gender-critical feminism is inherently transphobic? Well, no, I'm not, but I'm reading between the lines. So when we take all of this into account and see the question, what happened to sisterhood? You'd think this should be a question that is being asked of the title and of the image shown below. What happened to sisterhood that women who are feminists on every issue are excluded from feminism because they disagree on whether sex work is empowering, or whether a given understanding of gender is helpful to feminist discourse? And we might ask, given that these minor disagreements are enough to exclude somebody from feminism, what might happen to sisterhood going forward? How many other women will be excluded from feminism for having the wrong beliefs? This is what, if you spent more than 5 seconds to think about what is on your screen right now, you would come to realize. The disintegration of sisterhood in feminism, if there is such a thing, is best encapsulated by the purity politics that is ejecting thousands of feminists, young and old, hardened and casual, from the ranks of true, pure, orthodox feminism, as defined by people like Laurie Penny. But guess what? This question, what happened to sisterhood, it isn't being asked with reference to feminists who are being excluded from feminism. It isn't being asked with reference to the women who are too afraid to ask honest questions because they're worried about being attacked by other feminists. No, in fact, it's being asked because individuals who some feminists might consider to be men are in fact claiming that they are women. And other feminists are saying that the claim that you are a woman is all that's necessary to be considered a woman. And yes, some of these people might be intersex, or they might be post-op, or they might be very passable in some way or another. However, the modern queer theory is that anybody, anytime, can declare that they are a woman, and all that is necessary for them to be considered 100% a truly valid woman is just that, self-identity. So what happened to sisterhood? Is that Germaine Greer and J.K. Rowling are being attacked for disagreeing with queer theory? Is that what happened? No, what happened to sisterhood is that some wicked women aren't willing to acknowledge men as sisters. They don't believe that gender is determined 100% by self-identity, and as such they'd say that some or all of these so-called trans women are in fact men, and they don't consider those men to be women. And the reason I'm showing these random stock photos of men is because it needs to be stressed that according to queer theory, any one of these people could be a woman, and feminists should accept these brave women as sisters. This is insane. It's insane that without a hint of irony, Laurie Penny shows us women calling out other women and saying those other women have no place in feminism, while at the same time accusing gender-critical feminists of abandoning the feminist principle of sisterhood, aka female solidarity, because they don't think self-identity should determine who is a sister. I'm not done talking about the beginning of this article, because I do think that there are honest mistakes people make. People don't really think about their wording and make stupid arguments. Yes, opining about sisterhood while excluding loads of women with vaginas and ovaries and 2X chromosomes, it's not great optics, but maybe we'll just say it's an honest mistake. But I think there are some mistakes which are so damning that they ruin not just an individual's credibility, but reflect poorly on the whole ideology. And I think this is an example of that. Like, yes, this shows that Laurie Penny doesn't think before putting words to paper and publishing them. But the worst thing is that millions of people who have swallowed the queer theory pill will look at this headline and not even clock a smidgen of irony. And to me, that shows just how far gone many of these people are. How difficult it is to really bring them back to a simple discussion. And why it is that we need people to call this out. Because once the doublethink that underpins how somebody can write something like this is exposed and dismantled, I do believe the entire culture in progressivism regarding theories of gender will change. Right now, we're at a point where somebody can say, these women have no place in feminism. Their theories of gender are wrong and should be excluded. After all, don't they know the value of sisterhood? Hopefully the scale is going to tip at some point, and this level of insanity and fervour will simply collapse under its own weight. Okay, let's actually look at the article itself.
Last week, beloved children's author J.K. Rowling briefly became the world's most famous transphobe.
Off to a good start, already poisoning the well. Suffice it to say that if transphobia does mean anything at all, and I'm becoming increasingly less sure that it does, then it certainly shouldn't mean simply affirming a particular theory of gender.
Millions of distraught fans and confused bystanders were left wondering what the hell was going on.
I went for that with like the dramatization. That was really good, wasn't it? Like, what the hell is going on? That's like my old man who's like walks in on the grandkids just fucking around the sun. It's like, what the hell is going on? What on earth are you doing? Brilliant. Love it. Okay. I'm sure J.K. Rowling appreciates the massive fan base of Harry Potter, but I do hate how the fact that she has all these die-hard fans is used to accuse her of some kind of treachery, as if she had some sort of obligation to her fans to believe certain things and she's guilty of betraying them.
But Rowling's public spasm of self-delusion isn't unusual.
Okay, so this is obviously just really unnecessarily mean for a woman saying that sisterhood is important, but the next sentence is funny.
It's part of a larger, weirder pattern of prejudice.
See, it's only weird if you aren't actually listening to the objections of gender-critical feminists. Like, yeah, if you believe that gender-critical feminism is just, like, evil, bigoted transphobia, then it might be confusing why loads of otherwise progressive people hold to that view. But when you understand that gender-critical feminism is actually an attempt to establish a theory of gender that works better with progressive politics, it all makes sense. I just find it funny that Penny accuses others of self-delusion, while clearly her own unwillingness to understand other points of view leads to her, a very serious journalist, only being able to describe a social phenomenon as weird.
They ask me why the only Western leaders speaking the same language on trans rights as these British liberals are right-wing despots.
See, this is very confusing if your view of the world is really stupid. Like, I genuinely went through a phase where I remember saying to somebody, how can sex work be anti-feminist? Holland does sex work, and they're really progressive. As if, like, there are only two sides, progressive and conservative, and regardless of your reasons, if two people come to the same conclusion, it must mean they're basically on the same side. It's just a really lame way to look at the world that stifles debate. And obviously, like I've already said, it leads to a situation where you can only describe what is a fascinating example of two people on the same political wing disagreeing as simply weird.
Well, buckle up, because this is why.
Okay, so we're going to get a very good explanation now of why gender-critical feminism is big in the UK.
Britain is the epicenter of a strange, savage, and specific cultural backlash against trans rights.
Again, very serious journalist here writing about a topic, and their first two adjectives to describe it have been weird and strange. I would love to see what my professor would give me in my journalism portfolio if I did this. Like, oh man, this situation in East Africa is really weird. Like, it's super strange. Great analysis there. Fortunately, we do also have another adjective, savage, like a wild animal. Are you confident this is going to definitely not completely misrepresent gender-critical feminism?
That backlash is doing real harm to people whose lives should not be up for debate.
Sorry, I really want to put the emphasis in the right place there.
That backlash is doing real harm to people whose lives should not be up for debate.
Lives should not be up for debate. Lives should not be up for debate. What does that mean? See, she could have just said, gender identity should not be up for debate. That would be more accurate. But then that sort of would sound less reasonable, wouldn't it? Because why shouldn't their gender identity be up for debate? Why isn't it perfectly reasonable for feminism to contain a debate about what exactly it means to be a woman? Well, don't worry, because it's not gender identity that's up for debate, it's existence. It's lives, of course.
Its proponents have recruited a great many decent, well-intentioned people to their cause through subterfuge and scaremongering, including mainstream media figures and celebrities like Rowling.
So it seems to me like the most effective method for converting people to the gender-critical cause is being really honest, sincere, and calm in unpacking why it makes sense for feminism to have a debate about what gender identity should mean. In fact, I can personally say, as a decent, well-intentioned bloke myself, that when I thought that gender-critical feminists were being duplicitous and reactionary, I disagreed with them. It was only when I actually listened to the points they were making very clearly and politely that I was able to see that they had a good point. So it's that kind of subterfuge and scaremongering, where you just simply state the points of your objection for people to engage with if they like.
In the past half-decade, British transphobes have done everything in their power to convince the public that trans women are a sexual threat to women and girls and ought to be banned from women's changing rooms, public bathrooms, and prisons.
If queer theory is not a good way of understanding gender identity, then so-called trans women shouldn't be allowed into women and girls' private spaces, regardless of whether they are a sexual threat.
They have threatened and harassed trans teenagers and bullied trans speakers off stage.
Unlike J.K. Rowling, who has definitely not been threatened and harassed. For the record, if you threaten or harass anybody, you are scum. They even... wait, I need another example. I've got to put some good emphasis on this.
They even picketed Amnesty International for daring to invite a trans comedian to a woman's event.
These people who believe that woman isn't determined entirely by self-identity, you won't believe what they did, okay? They even objected when somebody whose only claim to being a woman was self-identity was considered to be a woman and invited to a woman's event.
I can't believe
Gender-critical feminists
acted completely
in keeping with their ideological convictions.
Their zeal is grounded in a totally false conception of what it means to be trans.
Right, so most gender-critical feminists object to the idea that gender is determined 100% by self-identity. So here we're about to find out that queer theorists don't believe gender is determined 100% by self-identity.
They accuse trans women of trading in stereotypes and implying that womanhood is, in Rowling's words, a costume, all about makeup, manicures, pink brains, and a liking for Jimmy Choos.
I've never met a gender-critical feminist who thinks this is what being a trans woman is. In fact, they believe the exact opposite, that queer theory defines womanhood through nothing substantive. However, many gender-critical feminists will criticize the way that some so-called trans women do seem to lay bare some problematic... Okay, let's try again. Oh no, how do I come back from this? Problematic notions of what it means to be a woman in the way they choose to present their femininity.
Ironically, some of these transphobes are happy to use the tactics of patriarchy against trans women, who find themselves subject to sexual shaming and taunts about their appearance by people who call themselves feminists.
Remember, definitely no trans activists ever do shitty things to gender-critical feminists, otherwise this would just be a pointless example of poisoning the well when both sides will sometimes engage in objectionable behaviour.
These transphobes have spent years fighting new legislation designed to make it easier to change your legal gender, and for now, they are winning.
Winning! Not within the actual feminist communities to which they belong, where they are kicked out for their views, nor in the media, where they're called transphobes and bigots, nor in politics, where there are many examples of women-only positions being occupied by men. But the gender-critical feminists are winning! One wonders how these people would cope when they find out what it's actually like to be losing.
After years of relentless campaigning and strategically seeding stories into the press, they have managed to convince a significant chunk of the population that trans people are an active threat to women and children.
I've actually changed some people's minds in my personal life on this issue, and I didn't do it by saying that trans people are evil threats to women and children, but by saying that I didn't think gender being based entirely on self-identity is a helpful way to understand gender and gender inequality.
Despite changing attitudes among the younger generation, life in Britain has rapidly become more hazardous for trans people, who are already one of the most marginalised groups in society.
You're going to be so upset when you realise that actually, lots of women who are getting tired of this queer theory stuff, they're in the younger generation. Also, it's funny that life has rapidly become more hazardous, even though it's the younger generation who are being more woke. So, for ages there were anti-trans people, but then recently there are young people whose attitudes are changing, and now also at the same time life has become rapidly more hazardous. I guess maybe you could say it's because this new generational conflict has heightened tensions.
Just as I was finishing this piece, the Sunday Times leaked details of new Tory plans to ban trans people from public bathrooms and single-sex facilities. This is being phrased as a victory for women and girls.
Yeah. And it sucks that small victories like these have to be won under a Tory government because people like you are shutting feminists out of progressive conversations and progressive movements. It sucks that the Tories, objectionable as they are the only major party that can actually push back against queer theory. I will say that for the record, I personally don't believe it's worth voting for the current Tories just based on their decent record on trans issues, because there are other things that matter, and generally the Tories are worse on those issues.
They are, or claim to be, feminists. They're doing all of this in the name of women's rights.
They are. Oh, by the way, can I point out that the example of life being more hazardous for trans people isn't expressed in terms of actual harm, but just them not being allowed to use women's spaces.
Critics call these transphobic feminists TERFs, an acronym that stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists, in order to distinguish them from other feminists who haven't yet drunk the transphobic Kool-Aid.
I just realised this. The fact she writes yet implies, like, that it's happening, it's coming. But okay, so wanting an open and honest debate about how gender should be defined is drinking the Kool-Aid, but shouting down anybody who disagrees that gender is determined 100% by self-identity is being cool, calm, and rational.
They prefer to be called gender critical, which is interesting given that they spend a significant proportion of their time loudly refusing to call trans and non-binary people by their preferred names.
Right, because agreeing upon terms is useful for an open and honest debate. Agreeing that the debate is between gender-critical theory and queer theory helps to define the debate clearly, while establishing the debate as being between transphobes and non-transphobes is pointless rhetorical fluff. In contrast to all this, the preferred names and pronouns of trans people are directly premised in the presumption that queer theory is true, so naturally those who reject queer theory would reject these terms. It's a bit like any time an ideology defines itself with a term that automatically presents them as correct. Like if I labelled my political ideology correctness, and called other people's ideologies stupidness, if an adherent of stupidness said, "Could you stop calling us stupidness, please? That's not the name we prefer to be called," and then I said, "That's interesting, because you refuse to call my ideology correctness, which is the name I'd prefer to be called." You see the issue? Gender critical is what gender critical feminists call themselves. It doesn't in any way hurt queer theorists to call them that too. However, for gender critical feminists, to call trans people by their preferred names and pronouns would be for them to directly contradict the substance of their disagreement with queer theory. Queer theory might as well call itself "we're right, you're wrong, suck it transphobes-ism," and then insist gender critical feminists respect how they wish to be identified.
Today, TERF is a slur has become a rhetorical tick for people who don't like trans women but don't want to be called out on it.
If you want to call gender critical feminists out, why don't you just call them gender critical feminists and actually engage with and disprove gender critical theory? Surely it couldn't be because you can't.
TERF is a slur. It's a word that's used to describe a prejudice, and calling someone out on their prejudice is often insulting.
Time for me to make an obligatory comparison between TERF and man-hater. You know what? When I call feminists man-haters, it is a slur, and I'm proud of that, because it's a word used to describe their prejudice against men. I can't help it if it's often insulting when I call those man-haters what they are.
So, to keep things simple, I'll just go ahead and call these feminists transphobes.
Considering how long an article this is to say a whole lot of nothing, I can at least respect the sheer audacity of choosing to actively misrepresent matters for the sake of simplicity.
They genuinely don't believe that they're doing anything wrong or harmful, in part because they refuse to listen to anyone telling them exactly why they're doing just that.
So you know how every time woke bros respond to articles from gender critical feminists, they do that thing where they say, "Be specific! What are your issues? You're not specifically drawing all of them out for me, so I guess they must not exist." See, I don't actually do that because I don't think specificity is the most important thing in the world. However, I need to point out that if that's the level I was operating on, I could be doing that so much right now.
A lot of people also say that they have nothing against gay people, they just don't want them around their kids, or violating the sanctity of marriage by marrying each other.
One of these things is not like the other. The gender critical debate isn't about what trans people are allowed to do. The debate is about what trans people are, full stop. The debate is about how gender should be defined. Being against gay people involves identifying that being gay is a thing, and it's very obvious what it is, then saying that there's certain things you don't think gay people should be doing. By contrast, gender-critical people do not identify being trans as being a thing, nor do they think it's being made clear exactly what being trans is. Rather, they reject the entire conception of gender established by queer theory. So how do you even begin to be prejudiced against trans people from a gender-critical perspective? That's a bit like saying atheists hate God.
If you haven't spent the last few years marinated in internal left-wing debate, you might wonder why on earth one oppressed group would choose to spend most of its limited time and energy harassing another, given how much else is going on in the world.
Also, if you don't understand that what makes a movement strong is when different people focus on different things. I don't think that trans identity politics is the biggest issue in the world right now. It isn't even something that I wanted to talk about on this channel really. However, when I saw bad arguments from queer theorists, I responded, and it organically reached a point where I found that this is the thing that I talk about now, and I'm fine with that. Because by talking specifically about this one thing, I'm not ignoring or taking away focus from other important things, I'm just contributing what I can to one discussion.
You might well ask, what happened to Sisterhood?
No, that's what I ask when I see you attacking other women simply because they have their own opinions on how women should be defined.
Sisterhood, in my experience, is largely about trying to grow up in the same house without killing each other, which is also really good training for progressive politics in general. Sisterhood means you fight You disagree, you infuriate each other, but you have each other's backs when it counts.
Okay, so I'd advise you pause now and read the entire passage, because it's actually really funny. Okay, so this is basically saying that sisterhood should be about still getting along with people, still getting along with other women, but calling them out as you would with a sibling. However, this is the article that starts off by implicitly saying TERFs have no place in feminism, and shows a picture saying no TERFs allowed. Now, I also have a sibling, and we've also disagreed on some stuff before, and neither of us have ever said to the other, you don't belong in this family, get out now. So yeah, this is just intensively dishonest. Penny is saying the appropriate thing to do is to stick by each other, maintain the integrity of feminism, but also have a debate within feminism about certain issues. This is exactly what gender-critical feminists want, and exactly what queer theorists don't.
This was new territory, and not everybody who made comments like this was being rude and cruel on purpose, but the internet reacted as the internet is wont to do, particularly the part of the internet full of angry left-wing queers in their teens and early 20s.
See, this is fair enough. I do think that it's due to the aggression on both sides that the debate has reached the point it's at now.
It would have been hard enough, but alongside these irascible media liberals and defensive internet queers was a third group, a small but committed cadre. I don't actually know what that word means. Cadre? Cadre? A small but committed cadre of British feminists who had, since the 1980s, been adamantly against trans people in every context, who believe, in the words of feminist activist Janice Raymond, that in an ideal world, trans people would be morally mandated out of existence.
This is where it gets really funny though, because apparently the blundering, hapless, accidental transphobes and the angry queers are both excusable. They can be forgiven. The true evil is the feminists. The feminists are the evil ones. So what happened to sisterhood? Well, apparently it's reached a point where everybody can be excused, everybody can be given a sympathetic narrative, except for actual feminists. Like, genuinely think about this. So I guess I, as a sort of liberal sort of man who was sort of a bit confused by queer theory, I'd fall into the category of hapless transphobes who could be excused. But what Laurie Penny wants me to know is that it's not my fault. It's all these evil feminists who just wanted to destroy trans people. They swooped in and they manipulated me. Brilliant. Good feminism, bro.
They are committed to an essentialist understanding of womanhood.
Every debate I've ever had with a queer theorist has involved their understanding of gender being far more essentialist than mine.
A reading of Gender and Power that identifies binary reproductive difference and male violence as the root of women's oppression.
Valid.
They believe that if anyone can become a woman, then the word woman means nothing.
Valid.
And therefore, apparently, trans people are out to destroy the entire concept of womanhood by their very existence.
Most feminists don't think trans people are actively, sneakily trying to destroy gender. It's more about theories than individual motivations, which I guess is the big difference between myself and Penny. She sees it in terms of this evil, particular group of feminists who are trying to destroy sisterhood by manipulating the debate. Meanwhile, I see it as a conflict of ideas, which could be solved by having a discussion about the validity of queer theory relative to gender-critical theory. Okay, I'm skipping through quite a bit of fluff, but I just want to point this out.
It's so dispiriting to watch it weaponized and twisted against marginalized trans and working class women who need feminism more than just about anyone.
Penny hasn't mentioned social classes anywhere else in this article, but she has mentioned sex work. As I pointed out elsewhere, it seems to often be working class women who face issues for expressing disagreement with queer theory.
Before we go any further, I want to take a moment to note that there is actually a point to this essentialist feminism.
I suspect that Penny isn't really an academic and hasn't really engaged with feminist literature. Mostly, I guess she's just heard some feminists mention essentialism and thinks she knows what it means. I bring this up because she seems to be using the term essentialism as if it's synonymous with biological essentialism, and this creates a falsehood. Firstly, because gender-critical feminists typically aren't biological essentialists. They can be, but they often aren't. By contrast, queer theorists are essentialists. They believe there is only one thing that essentially makes somebody a woman, and that is self-identity. So Penny is talking about essentialism as if essentialism is equivalent to gender-critical theory, even though most gender-critical feminists aren't biological essentialists. Biological essentialism isn't the only type of essentialism, and self-identity essentialism is actually the type of essentialism that is definitionally professed by queer theorists.
That alone makes it hard for some people to raise objections when sisterhood goes sour and start spending half its time frothing about trans people who only ever wanted to be able to declare their identity without declaring war.
Trans people are welcome to claim their identity, but other people are allowed to disagree with the self-identity essentialism that underpins the queer theory understanding of gender.
The problem with essentialist in-groups, however well-meaning, is that they usually end up picking a convenient group of outsiders to punish, preferably a group even more marginalized and vulnerable than themselves.
See, this is where the fact that Penny doesn't actually know what essentialism is really starts to bite her in the butt. Because we've just established that the only essentially essentialist theory of gender identity is not gender critical theory, but queer theory. So this sentence right here just becomes very funny with that in mind.
In the discomfort of media liberals and fervour of young trans activists, these essentialist feminists saw an opening.
Honestly, I wish she had stuck to her guns and just committed to calling gender critical feminists transphobes, like she said she was going to do, because her use of the word essentialist is kind of embarrassing.
They reached out to cis women in the media who were sick of getting called transphobes by trans people online, offering sanctuary.
Imagine presenting women offering solidarity to each other as a bad thing.
I've spoken to cis women involved in that side of the debate who have lost everything that mattered to them over years of austerity, cuts to services and welfare, who have been ground down by male violence and are now being told by people with an agenda that men in dresses are coming to take the last safe spaces they had.
It's almost like the modern progressive left's obsession with ideological purity is inherently destined to work against the most disadvantaged people who can't afford university educations to learn about all the hip woke new ideas that they have to uphold to be considered authentic feminists.
When these groups met, and when transphobic feminists like Germaine Greer were invited to speak at universities, trans campaigners peacefully picketed their events. They gave transphobes exactly the publicity and sense of persecution they'd been waiting for.
Because prior to this, women had no reason at all to feel persecuted.
There are a few reasons this happened in Britain rather than anywhere else. The ecosystem of liberal media and left-wing activism is smaller and more quarrelsome in Britain than it is in America, and a lot of people know each other, and a lot of it comes down to in-group loyalty and personal drama. Over time, any attempt to build bridges became impossible. Tensions on both sides were so high, and the wounds so raw, that it was way too late to get anyone to hear one another. Soon enough, the TERFs went right off the deep end.
Reminder everybody, it's the people who are saying that, hey, maybe it matters that feminism should always be a place where it's appropriate to debate gender identity. It's these people who went right off the deep end. Meanwhile, it's the people who say that if a beautician only wants to work with other women and doesn't want to wax another woman's hairy balls, then she is a transphobe. They're the people who are grounded in reality, because I think only a true lunatic would be against a woman getting her hairy balls waxed. By the way, what I'm describing is based on a true story, but I've also heard that the person I'm talking about is incredibly litigation happy to the extent that even mentioning them by name could potentially get you sued. Not that it even matters that this person is real, the point is that this is literally what queer theorists would say. If some working class woman who works as a beautician, who only works with women, were to say, I refuse to wax your testicles because I only work with women, that would be considered transphobic by contemporary queer theorists. Because guess what? Some women have testicles. But remember, you think that what it means to be a woman should be discussed in feminism? You think that the essentialist notion that only self-identity determines what it means to be a woman is silly? Wow, you're right off the deep end. Hey guys, just to let you know, I'm uploading this in 2 parts because I am not necessarily planning on uploading anything. I mean, this video did take a while of kind of doing scripting and obviously it's quite long. So I'm uploading it in 2 parts so that I can work on a few other things I've got to work on. Without necessarily having to worry about a consistent schedule for uploading this. So, I don't know, I'm not sure when the second part will come out, but look forward to that. And obviously like, subscribe in particular if you want to see the next part, share with your friends and all that stuff. And seeing as, I mean, this is just the end of the first part, but I will give a quick shout out to my patrons, and they are Hannah Taylor, Stephen Getting Off Podcast, Robert, Jessica Ortega, Constant Disappointment, Adriana Delgado, Rubble of Empires, Harper Alex, Kirsten, Lizu Desu. Yes, that is a lot of names, and that is incredible. I am so thankful for every single person who has given anything. You are all just awesome. So thank you so much for everything.